G'day everyone. Today, I've got a story that you really need to hear. So go on, grab a cuppa, make it a strong one, and settle in. My channel is all about the magic of a good yarn, and I want us to get lost in this incredible tale together. The night crept in, swallowing the Tasmanian highlands in a silent, inky darkness. Eliza Vance, 38 years old, former trooper, Special Air Service Regiment, that title, more than any medal or citation, was branded deep into her soul. Day 1246. The fountain pen scratched against the journal page. A crisp sound in the cold air. Temperature, -8 degrees. Weather, blizzard. This isolation was a punishment she had chosen for herself. And her only salvation. 3 years ago, her mind shattered by the conflict. She'd left the service, the dry dust and the acrid smell of cordite in Afghanistan. The face of the mate she couldn't save. The phantom echo of a child's cry that still rang in her ears during the quiet moments. To escape it all, she had found this place. A place untouched by the light of modern civilization. The cabin was a fortress for her mind. Firewood was stacked with military precision. Jars of preserved food stood in perfect, orderly rows. By the fireplace, a specific spot on the floor was reserved for the single glass of Bundaberg rum she allowed herself each night. And a worn-out copy of Banjo Paterson's poetry. Only this rigid discipline held her fracturing spirit together. A vivid scar, running from her right temple to her jaw, flickered and danced in the firelight. A phantom ache throbbed where 2 fingers on her left hand used to be. A constant reminder of the shrapnel that had torn through it. But the real wounds were the ones you couldn't see. PTSD, the army doctors had diagnosed. For Eli, it was simpler than that. Her soul had been burnt to ash on the battlefield. A wind that howled like a Tasmanian devil shook the small cabin. It was the worst storm of the winter. The forecast had warned of the biggest southerly buster to hit the highlands in a decade. But Eli's heart was calm. The storm was good. It was a physical force that numbed the thoughts, leaving no room for the nightmares to creep in. Her routine was an unwavering ritual. Dinner at 1800 hours. Check the weather on the shortwave radio at 1900. Read by the fire until 2200. That night, she was following the same rigid schedule. The sound that cut through the silence came just a little after 2100. It was a scratching sound. It was definitely not the wind, nor was it the heavy crack of a snow gum branch snapping under the weight of fresh powder. It was the desperate, frantic sound of something sharp clawing at the thick wooden door of her cabin. Eli looked up. The same hearing that had once distinguished the faint click of a pressure plate buried in the desert sands was now razor sharp. A wild animal? A wombat? No, not in this blizzard. No beast would willingly approach a place reeking of human scent. The possums would be sheltered. And the devils wouldn't venture this high in these conditions. The scratching grew more frantic, more desperate. It was followed by a low, guttural whine. Every hair on Eli's body stood on end. That wasn't the threat display of a wild animal. It was the sound of an intelligent creature, begging for help, and it was a sound she recognized. It was hauntingly similar to the sounds made by the combat tracker dogs she had worked alongside on deployment. Impossible. The nearest SASR training depot at Anglesea Barracks was over 150 kilometers away. A world away. Her hand moved by instinct towards the Lithgow rifle she kept propped by the door. But she stopped herself. Her gut, an instinct honed by years of combat, told her this was not a threat. This was something that needed saving. A door deep inside her mind. A door she had bolted shut for 3 long years. Creaked open with a groan. She no longer had the right to save anyone. Wasn't that why she had thrown everything away? Thump. This time, it was the dull, heavy sound of a body hitting the door. At the same time, a faint cry, like the last flicker of a dying candle, reached her ears and vibrated in her chest. The internal conflict lasted only a second. Before she knew it, she was moving towards the door. The wall of solitude she had spent 3 agonizing years building was being torn down by a primal instinct. The moment she slid the heavy iron bolt and opened the door, a ferocious wall of snow and freezing air blasted her face like a shotgun. Her vision was a complete whiteout, but at her feet, she could make out dark shapes, huddled together, almost indistinguishable from the shadows. 1, 2, 3, large dogs. As her eyes adjusted, their outlines became clearer. Lean, muscular bodies, short, dense coats covered in ice. Shivering violently, Eli gasped, a plume of hot air escaping her lips. Australian kelpies, not just any kelpies, but the specific, hardy working line favoured by the Australian Defence Force for specialist roles. 3 of them were dying on her doorstep. But that wasn't the only thing that made her blood run cold. Around their necks were worn, specialised harnesses, and glinting dully beneath him were the silver ID tags familiar to any soldier. Recognition tags. Why were SASR combat dogs here, in the middle of this frozen wasteland? Was it truly a coincidence that they had found their way to this exact spot? On the brink of death? Get inside, all of you. Eli's voice was calm, steady, surprising even herself. It carried the familiar tone of command from 3 years ago, a voice she thought she had buried forever. As if understanding her perfectly, the one dog still on its feet nudged its fallen companion with its nose, urging it inside. Their coordinated, intelligent movement spoke volumes of the high-level training they had received. There was no more hesitation. Eli stepped out into the blizzard and carefully lifted the most lifeless of the three. A female with a smooth, tan coat. The dog was heavy, its body shockingly cold. The lack of response as she was lifted sent a surge of pure urgency through Eli's chest. The other two dogs flanked her, their bodies pressed against her legs as if protecting a fallen comrade, and followed her into the cabin. She shut the heavy door, and the world became silent again. But this silence was different from the lonely, oppressive quiet of before. The faint, shallow breathing of three living creatures now mixed with the familiar crackling of the fire in the hearth. Eli gently laid the weakest dog, the tan female, on the thick rug in front of the fireplace. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, hypothermia, dangerous. The other two dogs paced nervously around her, their intelligent amber eyes shifting between their fallen mate and the strange human who was now with them. Their eyes held a mixture of weariness, caution, and a searching, profound intelligence. Stay! Eli's short, sharp command made the two dogs freeze in place. Her mind, forged in the chaos of combat, took over. First, assess the situation, then, provide first aid. She retrieved a comprehensive medical kit from a back room, one she had meticulously stocked for both humans and canines. It was a habit from her days on deployment with the canine units. Her movements were precise, efficient, without a single wasted motion. Hypothermia, severe dehydration, and this back leg, Eli murmured to herself as her practiced hands examined the female's body. Her left hind leg was swollen unnaturally at the joint. Despite the dog's freezing body, that one spot radiated a feverish heat. Infection, or a fracture. It was clearly an older injury, sustained long before they had started moving through the storm. The female whimpered but didn't resist. She was trained to accept treatment from humans. Even when in pain, it was more proof that these were no ordinary dogs. Eli's eyes focused on the ID tag. Echo, Maya 38729. ADF. The other two had similar tags. The alpha male, with a noble, intelligent face, was Bolt. The other male, with a stark black mask-like pattern on his face and a wary, intense energy, was Shadow. All three tags were engraved with tracking codes and the winged dagger insignia of the Special Air Service Regiment. You've come a bloody long way from home, haven't you? Eli said, the lines on her weathered face deepening. An SASR combat dog costs tens of thousands of dollars to train and maintain. They were valuable national assets. They wouldn't be wandering lost through a blizzard without a very good reason. Something had happened, something catastrophic. With a renewed sense of urgency, Eli began to dry Echo's body with a rough towel. Bolt watched her every single move without blinking. Shadow began to patrol the inside of the cabin, sniffing at the door and windows, checking the perimeter like a seasoned soldier. They were tactical operations canines, meant to operate in hostile environments. The realization sent a chill down Eli's spine. She wrapped a hot water bottle in a blanket and placed it against Echo's abdomen to raise her core temperature. In a shallow bowl, she mixed lukewarm water with a small amount of sugar and salt, an improvised rehydration solution, and gently lifted the dog's head to help her drink. Echo licked at it weakly a few times before letting her head fall back. Next, she dried Bolt and Shadow, checking them thoroughly for injuries. Apart from a few cuts and abrasions on their paws, they seemed to be physically unharmed. Once the three dogs had settled slightly, Eli examined Echo's body more closely, and then she saw it, tucked away on the underside of her specialized harness, almost invisible and sewn into a folded flap of material, was a small, waterproof pouch. It was deliberately and expertly hidden. A sense of deep foreboding washed over her as she carefully opened it. Inside was a small memory card sealed in hard, clear plastic, and a single scrap of paper. On it, scrawled in urgent pencil on waterproof paper, were 4 words: "Get this to Pike, immediately." The name made Eli's breath catch in her throat. Commander Douglas Pike, unforgettable, her former commanding officer, the man who had simultaneously hailed her as a hero in Afghanistan and plunged her mind into a private hell. Why was his name here? In this place, delivered by a dying dog? This was no coincidence. Someone, somewhere, was trying to pry open the door to her Fortress of Solitude. The name, Pike, was a curse that tore open old wounds. The image of the dusty command post in Taran Kout, of Pike's cold, emotionless eyes, flashed in her mind. Your call was the right one, Vance, he had said. You minimized casualties. You're a hero. But Eli knew better than anyone that it was a lie. A convenient story for the report. Damn it, the curse was swallowed by the crackling fire. Thinking about the past was useless now. She had to focus on the life struggling to breathe in front of her. Eli forced her thoughts back to the present. She switched on her shortwave radio and tuned it to the emergency frequency used by the ADF. But all that came through the speaker was the hopeless, drowning static of the storm. This is Vance, remote cabin, Central Highlands. I have 3 military canine units. One is in critical condition. Repeat, requesting immediate veterinary support. Over. She called out again and again, but there was no response. In this blizzard, the radio waves were being smothered and blocked by the mountains. The satellite phone would be just as useless in this weather. Completely cut off, her sanctuary had become a prison. Echo let out a pained whimper. The swelling on her leg looked worse, more pronounced than before. If the infection spread, she would die for certain. The past flooded back not as a memory, but as a vivid, waking nightmare. A fallen comrade, covered in dust and blood. His eyes, pleading for help, her own order to retreat, to leave him behind. She was too late, she couldn't save him. The crushing helplessness at that moment washed over her like a tidal wave. The small life gasping in front of her merged with the face of her fallen mate. Not again, she gritted her teeth and whispered to the empty room. I won't let another one die in front of me. She opened the medical kit again, rummaging through its contents. Deep inside was a packet of broad-spectrum antibiotics prescribed for her own use after a field injury. She wasn't a vet, but it was infinitely better than doing nothing. Estimating Echo's weight, she carefully crushed a tablet and dissolved it in a small amount of water. Using a needle-less syringe, she gently administered the bitter liquid into the back of the dog's mouth. Echo resisted for a moment. Then, with a sigh of resignation, swallowed it down. Good girl, you just hang in there. As if speaking to herself, Eli gently stroked Echo's head. Just then, she felt something warm and wet touch her hand. It was Bolt. The alpha male had silently sat down beside her, his worried eyes fixed on Echo, and he gently nudged his nose against Eli's arm. The caution in his amber eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound trust in the human who was trying to save his packmate. That pure, simple trust was a heavy weight on Eli's chest. These dogs didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she had done, or the suffocating guilt she carried. They just saw someone helping their mate, and they were choosing to trust her. The weight was crushing, and it was unbelievably warm. Eli fashioned a makeshift splint for Echo's leg and wrapped it carefully in a clean cloth. She then made a high-energy meal from her stores of jerky and powdered eggs and gave it to the 3 dogs. Bolt and Shadow ate with disciplined restraint, but Echo only licked a few mouthfuls before her head sank back down in exhaustion. The night wore on. Outside, the wind howled its mournful song. Eli sat by Echo's side, not sleeping. Every hour, she checked the dog's temperature, gave her water, and spoke to her in a low, encouraging voice. Sometime during the long night, Bolt and Shadow moved to sit on either side of her, leaning their solid bodies against her as if they were old, trusted companions. The lonely cabin was filled with a strange, unspoken sense of solidarity. It was like the silent, innate understanding of a battlefield. There were mates to protect. There was a mission to complete. The feeling was slowly, painstakingly, awakening Eli's dormant soul. As the first hint of dawn approached, Eli noticed Echo's breathing had become slightly deeper, more regular. Her body, which had been feverish to the touch, was also starting to cool. The antibiotics were working. Eli let out a long, slow sigh of relief, and in that exact moment, Echo slowly opened her eyes. They were no longer clouded with pain. In their clear depths was a surprisingly calm and fiercely intelligent light. Those were not the eyes of a frightened, wounded animal. They were the eyes of a soldier, assessing the situation, analyzing the human in front of her. Struck by that sharp, penetrating gaze, Eli held her breath. It felt as if the dog could see right through her, stirring the long-forgotten tension of the battlefield deep in her bones. "Who in the hell are you?" she whispered. "And what is on that message you carried here at the cost of your lives?" As if answering the question, Echo let out a single, soft bark. It wasn't just a noise. It was like a signal from a partner, signifying a formal handover of duty. Echo's bark marked a turning point in the pre-dawn silence. It was a signal that it was time for Eli to act. The storm had passed its violent peak and was beginning to weaken. With the sky lightening, there was a chance that communications might finally get through. Eli retrieved her last resort, a piece of equipment sealed away in a waterproof Pelican case, an ADF-issue satellite phone, which she had never powered on except for her mandatory monthly check-ins with her Army-assigned therapist. Activating it would broadcast her exact location to a network of satellites. It meant inviting the outside world into the sacred sanctuary she had defended for 3 long years. She could ignore it, wait for the storm to pass completely, take the dogs down to the nearest town, and make an anonymous call to the authorities. Then she could return to her solitude. Avoid the past, avoid any reunion with Commander Pike. It was the sensible, logical choice. But at her feet, Bolt looked up at her face, his expression full of worry. By the fire, Echo was still breathing heavily, fighting with every ounce of her being to live. They hadn't come here by chance. Eli was sure of it now. Out of all the remote cabins and huts scattered across the highlands, they had found the one inhabited by a former SASR trooper. It was too perfect, too precise. They had been sent to her. Regret, a familiar, gut-wrenching pain, seized her. She didn't want to be involved. But to abandon these lives in front of her, to turn her back now, would be the same as killing what little was left of her own soul. Sorry, she whispered to no one in particular, and switched on the satellite phone. After a few seconds of booting up, a small antenna symbol appeared on the screen, indicating a weak but viable signal. With a trembling finger, she dialed a number dragged from the depths of her memory, the emergency line for the SASR depot at Anglesey Barracks in Hobart. The ringing tone felt agonizingly long in the quiet dawn. After several rings, a flat, professional voice answered, "Anglesey Depot, Operations. This is former Trooper Vance. My service number is 824,513. Her voice automatically adopted the formal military cadence. "I am currently at a remote location in the Central Highlands. I have 3 SASR canine units in my care. I need to be patched through to Commander Pike. Immediately. It is a matter of operational urgency." The air on the other end of the line seemed to freeze. A few minutes of tinny hold music felt like hours. Then, a different voice came through the speaker. A voice that was deeper, heavier, and carried an innate authority that could intimidate anyone. "Vance?" "Commander Douglas Pike." The moment she heard his voice, Eli felt a physical shock, like a shard of ice being driven into her spine. "That's right, your dogs were dying on my doorstep." Eli shot back, not bothering to hide the raw animosity in her voice. "I understand the situation." Pike's voice was completely devoid of emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. "Report their tag numbers." Eli read out the names and numbers for all 3 dogs. The one named Echo was carrying a message addressed to you. "What the hell is going on, Pike? Did you access the message on the card?" "No, it's still sealed." "Good." A short, clipped confirmation, followed by a few seconds of heavy silence. What he said next made Eli doubt her own ears. "Vance, that was not a coincidence. It was intentional." "What did you say?" "We sent them to you. More accurately, their handler chose your location as a final resort protocol." The blood roared in her ears. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup. "Why? I'm out. I have nothing to do with you people anymore." "You are never truly out. Vance, you were listed as a contingency plan for this operation from the very beginning." Pike stated it as a simple, unchangeable fact. "We assessed your record, your unique skill set, and your intimate geographical knowledge of this region. A final protocol was established in the event the primary team was compromised and communications were lost." Her isolated cabin, her sanctuary from the world, had been nothing more than a pre-planned piece on their giant, invisible chessboard. Humiliation and a fresh wave of anger made her clench her jaw so hard it ached. "You have got to be kidding me." "I am not. This is a mission of the highest national importance." The package the dogs were carrying, that memory card, contains the complete source code and operational keys for our new autonomous drone program. Information that could fundamentally undermine our national security. Pike's tone sharpened slightly, losing its detached quality for a fraction of a second. "And the enemy who wants it is already on the move. Vance, listen to me very carefully. The moment you turned on that satellite phone, the enemy will have triangulated your exact position. They know where you are." Despair hit her like a physical blow. She had just led the enemy to what was supposed to be her safe haven. "A recovery team is on its way. But with this storm, it will take them at least 8 hours to reach you. Until then, you are to protect those dogs and that package at all costs." It wasn't a request. It was an absolute order, with no room for refusal or debate. "Vance, you are still on active duty. Good luck." The call ended abruptly. Eli stood frozen, clutching the satellite phone. Her fortress, besieged by the storm, was no longer a metaphor. It was now an isolated, indefensible outpost on the front line, surrounded by an unseen enemy. "They're coming." The words escaped her lips, a whisper carried away by the flames of the hearth. Pike's voice echoed in her head. "You are still on active duty. Don't be ridiculous." Her war ended 3 years ago in the sands of Afghanistan. She had left everything in that place, along with her shattered memories. She had killed her own spirit, disappeared from the world, and lived like a ghost just to hold on to her sanity. So why drag her back to the battlefield? Anger and despair swirled inside her like a black vortex. Her sanctuary now felt like a suffocating cage. The stockpiled food, the towering stacks of firewood, they were no longer provisions for the winter. They were now useless, pathetic supplies for a siege she couldn't possibly win. Suddenly, Shadow let out a low, rumbling growl. Bolt's ears perked up, the hair on his back bristling as he stared intently out the window. The dog's keen, supernatural senses had detected a threat that was still invisible and inaudible to her. Eli snapped back to reality. There was no time for self-pity. The enemy could be here any minute. Another part of her, a personality she had suppressed and hated for years, slowly began to awaken. It was the cold, calculating soldier who fed on fear and despair, whose mind sharpened and accelerated in extreme situations. The sleeping lion was finally awake. Right then, assess the situation. The words that came out were the standard, clipped phrases for taking command. First, establish a defensive posture. The cabin was built of solid Tasmanian oak logs. It could probably stop small caliber rounds. The problem was the windows. Large panes of glass offering a perfect, inviting line of sight. Eli moved quickly, her actions economical and purposeful. She built makeshift barricades in front of the windows with the heavy wooden furniture. She extinguished all the lamps and reduced the fire to a bare minimum of glowing embers, allowing her eyes to adjust to the oppressive dark and making the cabin harder to see from outside. Her combat skills, long dormant and rusted, returned with surprising, terrifying fluidity. Her body remembered the movements of the battlefield even when her mind wanted to forget. She went to a small back room she used as a gun safe. Inside was a well-maintained Lithgow F90 rifle, and a Browning high-power 9mm pistol, the same sidearm she'd been issued in the service. The cold, familiar weight of the steel felt good in her hands. They were tools of death, but to her, they were also her most trusted and reliable companions. She checked the ammunition and loaded each weapon. The metallic click-clack echoed coldly in the now silent cabin. Just then, through a tiny gap in the barricade, her eyes caught movement outside. A black shape, moving through the swirling snow. It wasn't a tree swaying in the wind. It was the unmistakable silhouette of a person, moving tactically, using the snow gums for cover. Not one person, multiple. A surge of heat, not from fear but from pure adrenaline, flooded her body. It was a warrior's fury. For 3 years, she had suppressed her fighting instinct, smothered it under a blanket of guilt and rum. Now, it was fully, terrifyingly awake. Maybe this was it. Maybe she never really wanted a peaceful life. Maybe she was just a broken person who only felt truly alive on the battlefield. So be it. Let them come. Either this lonely fortress would be her tomb, or it would be theirs. Eli raised the rifle, aiming through a small gap in the barricade. At her feet, Bolt and Shadow were in a low, coiled stance, ready to spring at any moment. Even Echo, dragging her injured body, had moved closer to her packmates, her gaze fixed on the threat outside, a low growl rumbling in her chest. They were no longer just dogs. They were her squad. "Game on," Eli said quietly, her voice laced with a grim, chilling determination. It wasn't the voice of a broken, haunted recluse. It was the voice of a commander, responsible for the lives of her unit. Her fortress of solitude was gone. This was now the first battlefield for her soul's bloody redemption. The battle began in silence. The enemy didn't approach carelessly. They were professionals, using the raging storm as natural cover, carefully and patiently observing her position. They were likely setting up multiple observation points around the cabin, analyzing the situation inside before making their move. Eli held her breath, peering through the night vision scope she had bought privately after leaving the service. The world through the green filter was severely limited by the blizzard, but she could still make out multiple distinct heat signatures hiding among the trees. At least 4 of them. They were completely surrounded, a perfect cordon. Outnumbered, she muttered to herself, but there was no panic in her heart. Instead, a cold, calculating excitement. The kind one feels when staring at a complex chessboard, dominated her thoughts. The enemy didn't know her strength. They didn't know how many people were inside, or what weapons they had. That information gap was her only advantage right now. Eli perfectly visualized the layout of the cabin in her mind. Every entrance, every window, even the spots on the floorboards that creaked under weight. She was the queen of this castle. The home ground advantage was hers. She set up a simple booby trap on the back door, the most likely and vulnerable point of entry. Just a few empty shell casings tied to the doorknob with a length of fishing line. A primitive alarm, but in the darkness and high tension, the subtle metallic sound would be enough to startle any intruder and give her a precious half-second. The dogs moved as if they understood her intentions completely. Bolt lay down under the north side window, the cabin's biggest blind spot, his large ears tuned to catch the faintest sound. Shadow stayed by her feet like a loyal shadow, awaiting her silent command, and even the injured Echo watched the direction of the enemy from the dim light of the hearth. A low, continuous growl rumbling in her throat. They were her eyes and her ears. They were functioning as a single, cohesive unit, without a single word exchanged. This was why SASR dogs were called living weapons. Time passed slowly, as heavy and thick as the air on a battlefield just before an assault. An hour, 2 hours, the enemy didn't move. They were waiting, patiently trying to wear down her nerves. A psychological game. She had experienced this countless times before. She calmly chewed on a piece of dried jerky and drank some water from her canteen. She had to conserve her energy for the fight that she knew was coming. Suddenly, Bolt twitched his nose and quietly stood up. His gaze shifted from the north window to the front door. He had smelled something. In this sealed-off, blizzard-swept space, for a scent to travel meant the enemy was very, very close. Eli raised her rifle again, focusing all her attention on the front door. Here we go. Her heartbeat grew heavier in her chest. A slow, steady drumbeat, but the expected sound of a door being kicked in or the crack of gunfire never came. Instead, what she heard was an entirely out of place and deeply unsettling sound. Knock, knock. A quiet, polite knock on the door. A trap. Eli's brain screamed a warning. A distraction? A demand for surrender? No, their objective was the package. They had no reason to keep her alive. Shadow started to growl, but Eli silenced him with a quick hand signal. Strangely, Bolt, who had been so tense moments before, wasn't growling. He just cocked his head, looking at the door in utter confusion. There was no killing intent, no aggression. The dog's reaction confused Eli's tactical thinking. They weren't an enemy, then who in the world would politely knock on a door in this extreme situation? This didn't fit any combat scenario she had ever experienced. Knock, knock, knock. A third time, slightly louder, more insistent than before. Eli kept her rifle aimed at the door, holding her breath. Whoever was on the other side of that door held the key to breaking this dangerous stalemate. Should she open it, or ignore it? Her decision, she felt instinctively, would determine the fate of everyone in this cabin. The silence stretched like a taut wire. The person on the other side of the door was also waiting. Listening, countless scenarios ran through Eli's mind at lightning speed. If it was the enemy, this was a sophisticated psychological tactic. The moment she opened the door or even answered, they would pinpoint her exact location and unleash a hail of gunfire. But what if, by some miracle, it wasn't the enemy? What if it was just a lost hiker caught in the storm? She immediately dismissed that possibility. This part of the Highlands was a death trap in winter. Even for professional climbers, no one would be here by chance. Who's there? After a long moment of hesitation, Eli asked in a low, controlled voice. She knew she was revealing her position, but staying silent meant giving the initiative and control to the other side. Sergeant Ava Sharma, Special Air Service Regiment. A clear, young woman's voice came from the other side of the door. The voice cut through the howling wind and reached Eli's ears distinctly. Sharma, a name she didn't recognize. Prove it. State your affiliation and your service number. Eli remained cautious, her rifle steady. I was sent ahead by Commander Pike to assess the situation. What is the status of the canine units? The mention of Pike's name made Eli's eyebrows twitch. But that wasn't enough proof. The enemy could have extracted that information from a captured soldier. Why are you here alone? Ahead of the recovery team? In this bloody storm? She asked the most critical, logical question. 8 hours until the recovery team arrived. It made no tactical sense for a single soldier to come ahead alone. It's a long story. Could you please let me in first? I'm about to freeze to death out here. There was a slight, undeniable urgency in her voice now. Eli glanced at the dogs at her feet. Bolt and Shadow were still quiet, just staring at the door. They were trained to react instantly to any human with hostile intent. Even a fleeting one. The fact that they were calm meant the person outside, at least, was not radiating immediate aggression, but it could be a clever, sophisticated act. Password, Eli said, playing her final card. Any member of the SASR would know the monthly recognition codes. The countersign. There was a brief silence from the other side. Then, river runs deep. Mountain stands tall. Eli instinctively completed the phrase. The answer was perfect. It was this month's password. Had the enemy compromised the codes? Or was she really a friendly? Her thoughts were going in circles. This one decision would mean life or death. One possibility occurred to her. If this woman was real, she might not be aware of the enemy forces hidden around the cabin. If she let her in carelessly, they would both become targets. It was humiliating. Her own paranoia was endangering a potential ally. The memory of 3 years ago, when she failed to trust her own men and made the worst possible decision, returned with a bitter, acrid taste. All right, I'm opening the door, Eli finally decided, her voice a low growl. But if you try anything funny, I'll put a bullet in your head. Understood? She kept her rifle raised as she slowly approached the door, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the bolt. Was a savior or a reaper waiting on the other side? The answer was about to be revealed. The dogs lay quietly, as if watching her decision, their intelligent eyes seeming to foresee what was about to happen. The sound of the heavy iron bolt sliding open echoed loudly in the night. Keeping the door between her and the outside as a shield, Eli slowly opened it a few inches. A figure, along with a furious gust of snow, slipped inside. It was a small woman, dressed in white winter camouflage. Half of her face was covered by goggles and a face mask. But her visible eyes were incredibly calm, showing no sign of panic. Once inside, she smoothly dropped her pack and slowly raised her hands to show she was unarmed. Her every movement was fluid, economical, and clearly that of a highly trained soldier. Sergeant Ava Sharma, sorry for the trouble, Trooper Vance, she said, removing her face mask. She looked to be in her late 20s. Her short, snow-dampened hair framed a sharp, intelligent face. Report, why are you alone? Eli demanded coldly, not lowering her rifle 1 inch. Sergeant Sharma met her intense, murderous gaze without flinching. Our unit was ambushed and separated. The K9 handler, Corporal Connolly, sent the dogs towards your location while he drew the enemy away as a decoy. Connolly? The name pricked at a distant, painful memory. According to his last transmission, he was going to find cover somewhere in this mountain range after shaking the enemy. I was moving to rendezvous with him. And how did you know my location? Did you track my sat phone signal? No, Sharma shook her head. Connolly told me, he said, if anything happens, head for the Ghost of the Highlands. He was certain you'd be here. The phrase, Ghost of the Highlands, irritated Eli. This Connolly, what's his full name? A terrible, dreadful feeling crept up her spine. Sharma hesitated for a moment, then spoke as if she had made up her mind. Liam Connolly. He was assigned to your unit in Afghanistan 10 years ago. The moment she heard that name, the sound drained from Eli's world. A vivid, painful memory flashed through her mind like lightning. 10 years ago, in the dry, rugged mountains of northern Afghanistan. A young, skinny kid, barely 20 years old. He was green, inexperienced, and always looked anxious, but there was a strong, stubborn light of determination in his eyes. Liam Connolly. In that operation, he had been targeted by a sniper. Eli had thrown herself in front of him to shield him, and in the process, her left hand had been shredded by shrapnel. And during the subsequent chaotic retreat. Is Connolly alive? Her voice was hoarse, a choked whisper that was unrecognizable even to herself. Yes, after that operation, he wanted to be like you. He went through hellish training and became one of the SASR's elite. And the best dog handler we have. Sharma's words pierced Eli's heart like heavy lead slugs. He said you saved his life. And that it was a debt he had to repay. So now, it was his turn to protect you. No, Eli screamed in the silence of her own mind. I'm not a hero who saved you. I'm the one who. In his last transmission, Sharma continued, her voice soft but firm. He also said this, if something happens to me, tell Vance, this isn't about the favor from 10 years ago. This is about responsibility, the future she forced on us. Eli didn't understand, but she knew those cryptic words held a profound, terrible meaning she wasn't aware of. Where is Liam now? Her voice was no longer that of an interrogator. It was a plea. I don't know. His beacon signal went dead 6 hours ago. About 10 kilometers northeast of here. He either turned it off to evade the enemy, or, she didn't voice the worst-case scenario. The life she had supposedly saved was now lost somewhere in this frozen hell. On the verge of death. And the cause of it, in part, lay in the terrible decision she had made 10 years ago. This wasn't a coincidence. It was fate, a cruel reckoning, demanding a payment for the past. Something inside Eli shifted violently. A tectonic plate of guilt and regret. A fierce self-loathing for the person who had hidden in this lonely fortress, turning her back on the past. And an overwhelming, undeniable sense of responsibility for a life she had failed to protect. She slowly lowered her rifle. Right, just one word, but that short word contained 10 years of unspoken regret and a quiet, steely resolve for what she had to do next. Sharma's eyes widened slightly. She had felt the air around the woman in front of her change in an instant. This was not a ghost haunted by the past. This was the face of a soldier, determined to return to the battlefield for something she had to protect. I'm going. Eli's voice was quiet, but filled with an unshakable, terrifying determination. What are you talking about? Sharma immediately objected. Your mission is to stay here and protect the dogs and the package. Going out there alone is a suicide mission. This isn't about a mission. Eli looked directly into Sharma's eyes. This is personal. The scene from 10 years ago was burned into her memory. Their unit was on the verge of being wiped out by a superior force. They were running out of ammunition, with casualties mounting by the minute. In that desperate, hopeless situation, Eli had made a ruthless decision: immediate retreat with only those who could move. The wounded were to be left behind. Officially, it was a painful but tactically necessary choice to save the rest of the unit. The decision had worked, and Eli was hailed as a hero for her cool-headedness. But the truth was different. The truth was ugly. At that moment, she had been consumed by fear. A primal, selfish fear of death. That fear had made her choose the most dishonorable act for a soldier, abandoning her mates. This went against the sacred spirit of Anzac, the promise to never leave a mate behind. And Liam Connolly had been there. He was only lightly wounded, but he had tearfully, stubbornly refused to leave the others behind. Eli had struck him, screamed at him, and forced him to retreat. I didn't save you. I just made you turn your back on your own conscience. I turned you into a coward, just like me. That guilt had tormented Eli's soul for 3 long years, a cancer eating her from the inside out. I'm not going to sit here and wait while he dies, Eli said, quickly packing essential gear into a backpack. Food, water, ammunition, a medkit, and snowshoes. I heard you left the service because of trauma. Are you sure you're in a state to make sound judgments right now? Sharma's words hit a raw nerve. Sound judgments? Eli laughed, a harsh, grim sound. I haven't been of sound mind for a single day in 10 years. But I can tell you this. I will never abandon a mate again, no matter how reckless it is. Seeing the quiet, almost mad fire burning in her eyes, Sharma was at a loss for words. This was beyond persuasion. This woman might be looking for a place to die, but she also might be the only one who could succeed. Shadow, Eli called out, and the dog with the black mask immediately stood by her side. She had identified him as the best tracker of the 3. We're going to find your master. Come on. Shadow let out a low whine, as if he understood her completely and was ready. Wait, Sharma tried to argue one last time. You stay here, Eli cut her off, her voice hard as iron. Look after Bolt and Echo, and draw the enemy's attention here. That's your mission. It was a commander's order, leaving no room for argument. If I'm not back by dawn. Eli paused for a moment, the words catching in her throat. Destroy the package, and take the dogs south. That's your best bet. It's a pointless sacrifice. Sharma's desperate cry echoed in the small cabin. Eli didn't answer. She just opened the door. Outside, the blizzard was even more intense. A swirling, chaotic world of white darkness. She took a step outside, and the freezing air stabbed her lungs. But strangely, there was no fear, only a deep, burning thirst for atonement, and a quiet determination to reclaim her lost soul. She never looked back. She was heading in the opposite direction from the way she had fled all those years ago. Towards the heart of the storm where death surely waited. It was a departure on a desperate mission, and at the same time, the beginning of a long, arduous journey to save her own soul. The blizzard was a white devil. Sharp, needle-like ice particles hit her face, and the howling wind relentlessly stole the heat from her body. Visibility was only a few meters ahead, and her sense of direction was easily lost. But Eli pushed forward. Ahead of her, a single dog moved like a black arrow piercing the darkness. Shadow. His dark coat was a stark contrast to the white snow, her only beacon in the maelstrom. Every so often, Shadow would stop, push his nose deep into the snow, and analyze the faint, microscopic scents carried by the wind. They were the invisible traces left by his master, Liam. It was a phenomenal, almost supernatural tracking ability, impossible for any human. Eli just followed that small, determined back, putting her complete faith in him. In the extreme, life-threatening conditions, a perfect, wordless bond of trust was formed between them. When Eli slipped and fell in the deep snow, Shadow would immediately turn back and brace himself against her to help her regain her balance. On the exposed, wind-blasted ridges, they communicated with just a look, a shared glance, deciding when to take cover from the ferocious gusts of wind. It was the moment a woman who had been utterly alone for 3 years found a partner again. Her heart was pounding in her chest, not from the cold, it was the intense, visceral feeling of being alive. Adrenaline surged through her body, and her senses were sharpened to their absolute limit. Her numb fingers, her screaming muscles, they no longer mattered. Her mind was focused on one single thing: rescuing Liam. Liam's beacon had died 10 kilometers to the northeast. In normal mountain conditions, it would be a 4-hour hike at a steady pace. But in this raging blizzard, it would take more than double that time. And all the while, the enemy could be closing in from behind. Time was running out. Eli mapped out the terrain in her head, calculating the shortest, most direct route. Following the main ridge would be faster but would expose them to both the wind and the enemy. Going down through the gully would be stealthier but came with the constant danger of avalanches. She chose the riskiest option, the ridge, trading time for safety, or rather, trading it for a life. "Let's go, Shadow," she yelled, her voice cutting through the wind. As if understanding her resolve, Shadow barked once, a sharp, defiant sound, and started pushing through the deep snow again. How much time had passed? It felt like an eternity. Her body was numb, a machine running on pure willpower, and putting one foot in front of the other was her entire world. Then, suddenly, Shadow stopped dead in his tracks. He let out a low, dangerous growl, staring intently at a single point in the darkness ahead. Eli immediately dropped to a crouch and raised her night vision scope. About 200 meters ahead, half buried in a deep snowdrift, was a small, dark shape, an old ranger's hut, used for fire spotting in the summer. Eli knew of its existence. Shadow's attention was fixed on it. Was Liam inside? A flicker of hope ignited in Eli's exhausted heart, but that light was extinguished in the next moment. Shadow's intense gaze wasn't just on the hut. Her scope revealed multiple distinct heat signatures scattered in the trees surrounding it, lying in wait like a pack of patient wolves. A trap, a bloody trap. The enemy was using the injured Liam as bait to lure in any rescue party and wipe them out. She thought she heard a faint groan from inside the hut. It could have been the wind playing tricks on her, but to Eli, it sounded like Liam's voice, filled with pain. It was a hopeless, impossible situation. At least 4 enemies, and just her and a dog, and they were lying in ambush, waiting for her. What could she do? Retreat to the cabin and regroup with Sharma? No, there wasn't enough time. Liam would die, but rushing in was suicide. Forward was hell, and back was hell. Eli gripped her snow-covered rifle tightly. The memory of 10 years ago, when she had faced a similar impossible choice, came flooding back. That time, she chose to retreat, but now, her mind was made up. Turning back was no longer an option in her vocabulary. She gently stroked Shadow's neck and whispered in his ear, "Listen to me, mate, I'm going for that hut. You stay here, don't move, and if I go down, you get back to the cabin. You warn Sharma, got it?" It was a cruel, heartbreaking order to give to a partner. Shadow whined, a sad, pleading sound, and licked her cheek, as if begging her not to go. "I have to." Eli stood up, pushing away the warm, comforting feeling. There was no plan, there was no strategy, just a single point of attack. A frontal assault, so direct and unexpected that it might be the only chance to break the stalemate. Her soldier's instinct screamed at her that it was the only way. She took all her spare magazines from her pack and stuffed them into her vest pockets. She clicked the safety off her pistol, took one deep, calming breath. "Let's go," she said to herself, and burst out from behind the snowdrift. She ran straight for the ranger's hut, a lone figure against the white expanse. As expected, the enemy reacted immediately. The sharp crack of a gunshot split the air. Bullets kicked up snow at her feet and slammed into the trees beside her with sickening thuds. But Eli didn't stop, running in an unpredictable zigzag pattern. She fired her rifle from the hip towards the woods where the enemy was hidden. The roar of the rifle echoed as she fired, sending a spray of bullets into the trees. It wasn't to kill them. It was suppressive fire, to make him duck, even for a second, so she could close the distance. The enemy fire stopped for a moment. Just as she'd hoped, she didn't miss that split-second opening. She slid the last few meters against the rough wall of the hut. Her back pressed against the logs, gasping for breath as she located the door. The next moment, she kicked the door in with all her strength and rolled inside. It was pitch black. The smell of mold and old, damp wood filled her nose. In the darkness, a figure was slumped against the far wall. "Liam," she called out, her voice raspy. The figure slowly looked up. A sliver of moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating his face. It was him. 10 years had changed him, carved lines of hardship into his face. But it was undoubtedly the young man she remembered. Liam Connolly. His left leg was badly injured. His trousers stained a dark, crusty red. "Eli," Liam stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. A reunion after 10 years. But there was no time for joy. Liam's expression shifted from disbelief to shock, and then to a deep, bitter despair. "Why did you come?" His voice was a hoarse, painful whisper. "Why now, after all this time?" There was no gratitude in his voice, only a deep, profound resentment. "Didn't you abandon us? Didn't you abandon your mates 10 years ago?" The words were sharp blades that pierced Eli's heart. So that's what he thought. That she was a coward who had run away, betraying the Anzac spirit. She wanted to scream that he was wrong, that it was more complicated than that. But the words wouldn't come. Before her eyes, a single tear rolled down Liam's cheek. It wasn't a tear of joy at being rescued. It was a tear of anger and sadness for a betrayal he had carried in his heart for a decade. Outside the hut, she could sense the enemy closing in, tightening their cordon. In this desperate, hopeless situation, the two soldiers just stared at each other across a gap of 10 long, painful years. "There's no time to talk. We have to get out of here now," Eli said, trying to push down her emotions and take control of the situation. But Liam didn't move. Instead, a dry, bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Get out? To where? You don't get it, do you? This was supposed to be my grave. What the hell are you talking about?" "Am I?" Liam's eyes glinted with a dark, unsettling light. 10 years ago, in that hell, I looked up to you. You were a real soldier. Always calm under fire, willing to risk your own life to protect your squad. But I was wrong. You left us." "No," Eli couldn't help but shout, the word torn from her throat. "That was a tactical decision to save the majority of the unit." "Stop with the bloody excuses." Liam's roar filled the small, claustrophobic hut. "I saw it. I saw the look in your eyes when you looked at the wounded. Like we were just dead weight. I saw the fear in your eyes. You wanted to get out of there more than anyone." His words accurately pinpointed the part of herself she had tried to hide for so long. The ugly truth she ran from. It was true. She was terrified. More than anything, she was scared of dying. That primal fear had robbed her of her composure as a leader and her pride as a human being. "You're right," Eli finally admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was a heavy, suffocating truth she had been lying to herself about for 10 years. "I am a coward. I'm no hero. Just like you said, I was going to abandon my mates to save myself." Liam was speechless, stunned into silence. He had expected excuses, justifications, anything but this raw, brutal confession. "But," Eli continued, her eyes no longer filled with fear or shame, but with the quiet, unshakable resolve of someone who had accepted everything. "There was a reason I dragged you out of there, Liam, a reason I forced you to come." "A reason?" he whispered. "You wouldn't leave the side of the wounded. Even when your own life was in danger. You couldn't abandon your mates. You had a sense of honor. A true moral compass. Something that I had just thrown away in a moment of panic." Eli slowly approached him, her movements careful. "I wanted to look away from my own cowardice. My own failure. So I dragged you down to my level. I made you abandon your mates. Too, by turning you into a coward just like me. I tried to escape my own guilt." That was the truth of 10 years ago. The ugly, selfish human nature hidden beneath the mask of a hero. Liam was lost for words. The pure, righteous hatred he had held for Eli for so long began to crumble, to disintegrate. She wasn't a hero, but she wasn't just a coward either. She was just a human being, like him, tormented by the same fear and guilt. "I'm sorry, Liam." Eli bowed her head deeply. "An act unthinkable for a former superior. My selfishness has haunted you, has shaped your life, for 10 long years." A heavy silence enveloped them. Outside, the enemy was closing in for the final assault, their footsteps crunching in the snow. Then, a choked, watery laugh escaped Liam's lips. "Well, that's not fair, is it, coming out with that now? After all this time?" He wiped his tear-streaked face with the back of his hand. "All this time, hating you was the only thing that kept me going. Surpassing you was my only goal. And now? It's over now," Eli said, gripping his shoulder firmly. "You don't have to hate me anymore. Don't become like me. Be the real soldier who never abandons his mates. The soldier you were always meant to be." At those words, the straight, determined light returned to Liam's eyes. The misunderstanding was resolved. The 10-year gap was closed in just a few heart-wrenching minutes. But their fragile moment of reconciliation was cut short. A bullet pierced the wall of the hut, splintering the wood next to Eli's head. The enemy's final assault had begun. Just then, Liam's radio crackled to life with Sharma's frantic voice. "Vance, we are under attack. The cabin is surrounded. There are too many of them." Surrounded on all fronts, a completely hopeless situation, but Liam, surprisingly, looked at Eli with a calm, steady smile. "Give me an order, trooper, one more time." Those were the words he couldn't say 10 years ago, and the words Eli had longed to hear for a decade. "We are getting out of this alive." Eli's order was simple, but it was filled with an unbreakable iron will. Liam nodded firmly, his face set with determination. "Roger that." The 10-year gap between them was gone. All that was left was a commander and her trooper, bound by absolute, unshakable trust. The situation was desperate. At least 4 enemies outside the hut, and even more attacking the cabin where Sharma and the other dogs were. The odds were impossible, but Eli's mind, in this extreme situation, was clearer and sharper than ever. She visualized the hut, the enemy positions, and the intensifying blizzard as a single, 3-dimensional tactical map. "Liam, cover me," Eli yelled, and threw her body with all her might against the back wall of the hut, creating a large, splintered hole, a new, unexpected firing line. As snow and wind blasted inside, the enemy hesitated for a split second. Confused by the sudden, aggressive action, Eli fired her pistol through the hole. Her shots were precise, hitting one of the enemies hiding in the trees. A short, guttural scream was lost in the roar of the blizzard. "One down, to your left, another one," Liam shouted, returning fire from another window, dragging his injured leg as he moved. His shooting was just as accurate, proving he was one of the SASR's finest. Their teamwork was perfect, seamless, as if they had been fighting side by side for a decade. It was as if her old, legendary squad had been reborn in this frozen hell. But the enemy was good, and they were professionals. They quickly regrouped and unleashed a furious barrage of crossfire on the hut, turning the log cabin into Swiss cheese. "Damn it, we're pinned down," Eli gritted her teeth. Then, her eyes caught something, an old kerosene lamp in the corner of the hut, and next to it, several hunting flare gun cartridges. A makeshift stun grenade. "Liam, cover your eyes and ears," Eli shouted, and threw the lamp with all her might towards the woods where the enemy was concentrated. The lamp shattered against a tree, spilling its flammable contents onto the snow. She then fired a flare into the spill. Woomph! A massive fireball erupted with a deafening roar, turning the pre-dawn darkness into brilliant, blinding day. The intense heat and light stunned and disoriented the enemy. "Now, let's go." Eli seized the opportunity. She and Liam burst out through the opposite wall of the hut, which was now engulfed in flames. But the last enemy was waiting for them. A large, broad-shouldered man, likely the leader. He had kept his cool through the chaos and had correctly predicted their escape route. The muzzle of his assault rifle was aimed straight at Eli. It was over. Eli braced for death. In that instant, a black, furry blur shot out from the side. Nor, Shadow. He had sensed the immediate danger and had disobeyed Eli's order. Rushing to their aid, Shadow sank his powerful teeth into the man's arm, shaking his head violently. The man's aim faltered for a critical second. Eli didn't miss that split-second opening. Her pistol barked, and a single bullet found its mark between the man's eyes. The large body slowly collapsed onto the snow. An eerie silence returned to the battlefield. In the deepest darkness before the dawn, 3 figures were gasping for breath, their exhalations turning to frost in the air. Eli, Liam, and Shadow. They had turned a hopeless situation around. But there was no time for relief. The last enemy, in his dying moments, a bloody grin on his face, pressed a small detonator switch in his hand. "Your mates can join you in hell," he rasped. Simultaneously, the sky in the direction of the cabin flashed a brilliant, blinding white. The light was gone in an instant, but the afterimage was burned onto Eli's retinas. "Sharma!" Liam's desperate cry cut through the cold, thin air. The cabin, the worst possible thought crossed her mind. Had the enemy planted a bomb at the cabin as a failsafe? A final act of spite? Eli immediately switched on her radio. "Sharma, report. Ava, talk to me." There was no response, only the harsh, empty sound of static. Had the EMP from the blast fried the communications? Damn it! Eli slammed her fist into the snow. The hope she had just regained was once again thrown into the abyss of despair. "Eli, we have to get back there. Now," Liam said, trying to stand on his injured leg. But Eli stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Wait, this could be another trap." Her mind, despite the extreme fatigue and emotional turmoil, was still working, still calculating. The flash was too quiet for a large explosion, and there was no smoke rising into the sky. That wasn't a bomb, it was likely a powerful, directional flashbang, a tool to blind and deafen, to create an opening for a final, decisive assault. The real attack on the cabin had just begun. "Liam, you wait here. Shadow, you stay with him, protect him." "But that's an order." Not leaving any room for argument, Eli started running back through the blizzard alone, back the way she came. At a full, desperate sprint, her heart felt like it was going to burst in her chest. Panic, fear, and a tiny, flickering sliver of hope. "Ava, be okay. Bolt, Echo, you too. I can't lose anyone else." How long did she run? The familiar, dark silhouette of the cabin emerged from the darkness. There was no smoke, it wasn't destroyed, but figures were moving around it. The rest of the enemy unit, preparing to storm the cabin. About 6 of them. They hadn't noticed her yet. Eli hid behind a large snow gum, holding her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. What could she do? She had no chance against these numbers in a frontal assault. But before she could act, the situation changed dramatically. On the roof of the cabin, a lone figure stood against the first light of dawn. It was Sharma. She had Eli's rifle slung on her back, and in her hands, she held a wire-launching device. It was a piece of special equipment used for climbing or crossing ravines. Was she going to use it as a weapon? As the enemy prepared to breach the door, Sharma moved. She leapt from the roof like a hawk diving for its prey. As she fell, she fired the launcher. With a sharp hiss, a wire with a heavy grappling anchor shot out and impaled 3 of the enemy soldiers, pinning them together against a large tree. The remaining 3 were stunned into inaction by the sheer, unexpected violence of the attack. It was a fatal hesitation. From every window of the cabin, muzzle flashes erupted, gunshots echoed in the clearing. While Sharma drew all the attention, someone inside had opened fire. It was a brilliantly coordinated, devastating attack. A few seconds later, silence fell on the battlefield once more. The rising sun was beginning to illuminate the dark, still shapes lying on the pristine snow. Eli watched, stunned, unable to process what she had just seen. The cabin door opened slowly. Sharma walked out, followed by 2 dogs, Bolt and Echo. Echo was still limping, but her eyes were bright and strong. Clamped in their jaws were Eli's pistol and another sidearm, rigged with a special harness that allowed them to be fired. Ava, Sharma and 2 dogs. They had just eliminated a team of 6 armed professionals. The dawn had broken. The long, violent storm had passed as if it had never been. A strange, profound silence filled the snow-covered ground, which was now littered with the scars of battle. Eli, Liam, Sharma, and the 3 dogs stood in that silence, watching the rising sun. They had lost much, but they had gained something more. A bond stronger than blood had been forged between them in the crucible of combat. In the distance, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of helicopter rotors cut through the air. Rescue, but in Eli's heart, along with relief, there was a sense of uncertainty, of loss. Was there a place for her here anymore? The fight was over. Would she have to return to her lonely, ghost-like days? The helicopter landed in a swirl of snow in the clearing in front of the cabin. Soldiers in familiar winter camouflage jumped out, and leading them was the man with the same cold, unreadable expression, Commander Douglas Pike. Pike took one long look at the scene of carnage and seemed to understand everything in an instant. His gaze moved from Eli to the wounded Liam, to Sharma, and then to the 3 dogs who now stood protectively by Eli's side. He walked up to Eli. A tense, heavy silence hung between them. Eli glared at him, the man responsible for all of this. But the words that came out of Pike's mouth were unexpected. "Good work, Trooper Vance." Then, he did something Eli had never seen him do. He bowed his head deeply. It wasn't just a commendation to a subordinate. It was a sincere, profound expression of gratitude and apology. "Involving you in this mission was my decision alone. I won't ask for your forgiveness. But thanks to you, this country is safe. Thank you." Eli said nothing. She just watched him. The raw, burning hatred she had felt for Pike was gone. The ordeal of the last 2 days had washed away all the burdens and grudges of the past. The injured Liam was carried onto the helicopter on a stretcher. Eli followed, urged on by the soldiers. As the helicopter took off, she looked down at the cabin she had lived in for 3 long years. It was no longer her lonely fortress. It was a sacred place where she had reclaimed her lost soul and vowed to start anew. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular. At that moment, she felt a warm, wet touch on her hand. Bolt had sat down quietly beside her, resting his large head on her arm. His intelligent eyes seemed to say, "Your place is with us now, mate." Eli gently stroked his head. She wasn't alone anymore. Beside her were the mates she had fought with, side by side, and would die for. From his stretcher, Liam gave her a sharp, perfect salute. Sharma offered a small, knowing smile. Shadow and Echo looked up at her face, their expressions full of unwavering loyalty. Eli felt a warm fire kindle in the depths of her soul. It was the warmth of the bond between people, the warmth of mateship, a feeling she thought she had lost forever on the battlefield 3 years ago. The helicopter flew away from the snow-covered mountains, which were now glowing a brilliant gold in the morning sun. Her lonely battle was over, but her new life was just beginning. The woman haunted by the ghosts of the past was gone. In her place was a soldier, with mates to protect, looking towards the future with clear eyes. Her soul had been redeemed, and by her side, always, would be her 3 loyal, faithful companions. This was the truth she had found at the end of a frozen, desolate despair, that to truly live is to fight for your pack, for your mates, a simple, and above all, a precious answer.